this Shabbat, which is not only just a regular Shabbat, but the Day of Atonement. So, what we will be doing today is, for our special Yom Kippur service, as per usual, look at the Day of Atonement, some of its significances, talk about some of its importances and how it pertains unto us. So we'll begin. Well, first of all, everyone here, safe to assume, has some understanding as to what the importance and significance of the Day of Atonement is. For various reasons, most mainstream believers and also some quote-unquote law-abiding believers don't see or acknowledge the significance of this day because of the fact that, Yeshua has completed it, he finished it, he fulfilled it. But the way that we understand it, when we look at the feasts, how they're separated in terms of their seasons, we think about the spring feasts. The spring feasts, in every way, have been fulfilled. We see Yeshua as the Passover lamb. We understand the idea of dedicating our life to a life of sinlessness. And so when we think about what Yeshua has done as far as his redemptive sacrifice that he made, and our the protection that we receive through the blood that he shed for us, there's nothing more that we could think about that could be done as far as the fulfillment of Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread. For the most part. I had to think about it. And there is a little bit more that could be done. Generally speaking, Passover is something that we could say is fulfilled. The things that it points to from a Old Testament perspective into the New Testament, those things have been done. Shavuot, we had the original Shavuot, the giving of the commandments, which only points us towards the new covenant and the Spirit being poured out, which happened in the same way that the original people that stood there and waited together with the disciples for the Spirit to come down, the same thing that made available to them is also made available to us. And so from that perspective, the Shavuot has been fulfilled in terms of the Most High pouring out his Spirit unto his people, binding us to himself and causing his law to be placed into our hearts. Now we can talk about the quantity of the Spirit inside of us, but we got the same quantity that the apostles had. It's the same thing, right? And so from a seasonal perspective in terms of the spring feast, we can look at the spring feast and say, generally speaking, those things they're not done, you know, but the point has been made.
I say stick work.
Yeah, it's
Done.
it's done. Well, sometimes you take something out the oven and there's like carryover cooking time, right? You take it out a little bit sooner so that it can finish, you know, out of the oven. It's kind of like that. But the fall feast, when we think about the fall feast, there's more. There's more. It's incomplete. It's incomplete. It's false to think of the idea of when Yeshua said, "It is finished," that he meant by saying that everything that has to do with salvation is over. His task was finished, but there's more things to be done. Case in point, the Day of Atonement. When we look at the Day of Atonement, we can understand that the components of it were always something that wasn't done by the people. It never was. It was always the priests. The people just came and presented themselves there. But the priest did the work. And so when we think about the Day of Atonement and all that the priest did, one significant thing that we think about that was done at the Day of Atonement for that annual situation was the fact that all iniquity, all transgression, and all sin was taken care of. And so since we live in a situation where, you know, there is sin, the fullness of the Day of Atonement, what it signified, what it identifies, is not finished. And so we're going to look at that a little bit today. I want to, first of all, go over to, well, we have to go to Leviticus 23. Is that where it's big enough? Let's see. We have to go to Leviticus 23 and look at chapter 23 and verse, let me pull this up here. Verse 26, and let's read from 26 to 32.
Leviticus chapter 23, verse 26. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, on the 10th day of this 7th new moon is Yom Kippur. It shall be a set-apart gathering for you, and you shall afflict your beings, and shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh. And you do no work on the same day, for it is Yom Kippur, to make an atonement for you before Yahweh your Elohim. For any being who is not afflicted on that same day, he shall be cut off from his people. And any being who does any work on that same day, that being shall I destroy from the midst of his people. You do no work, a law forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. You said 32?
32.
It is a Sabbath of rest to you, and you shall afflict your beings on the 9th day of the new moon at evening. From evening to evening you observe your Sabbath.
Okay, very good. So, atonement, when we think about atonement, Yom Kippur, it's not about fasting. In fact, when we look at the verses, it don't even say the word fasting. right? We understand that the way that we are able to afflict our souls is to deprive it of the main thing one of the main things that it desires, which is food, right? And so the idea of fasting really is a vehicle to get us to a place. The point of this really is about intimacy with Messiah, removing, setting aside carnal desires and concentrating on the Most High and His will for our lives. And so atonement, even though we think about it as being this time, which is a day that we observe, annually, the day really reminds us of a lifestyle, which we remove our carnal desires, from our life and concentrate on those things which are spiritual. Paul said that in the flesh, it's actually impossible to please Elohim. And so he came to do for us something, Yeshua did, that, helps us to be able to be the sons and daughters that the Most High will have for us to be. And, some of these atoning components is kind of what I want to talk about today for a little bit. Let's go over to Romans. Let's look at the book of Romans, chapter 3. The book of Romans, chapter 3. I'm going to look at Romans 3, verses 21 through 26. Because we're going to be talking about atonement. But I kind of want to talk about, I want to build up. I want to make a little build up thing. Okay? So we can get over to Romans. Chapter 3, verse 21 through 26.
Romans chapter 3, verse 21 through 26. But now, apart from the Torah, a righteousness of Elohim has been revealed, being witnessed by the Torah and the prophets. And the righteousness of Elohim is through belief in Yeshua, Messiah, to all and on all who believe. For there is no difference. For all have sinned and fall short of the esteem of Elohim, being declared right without paying by his favor through the redemption which is in Messiah Yeshua, whom Elohim set forth as an atonement through belief in his blood to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his tolerance Elohim had passed over sins that had been taken place before, to demonstrate at the present time his righteousness, that he is righteous, and declares righteous the one who has belief in Yeshua.
Okay, very good. So there's some things that pertain unto atonement here in this verse that I want to talk about, but of course, I want to deal with some of these other verses over here. And we look at where it begins in verse 21, where it starts off and it says, apart from the Torah, apart or without or separate from the law. Separate from the law, separate from the Torah, a righteousness. Interesting, I was looking at the kind of the language. A righteousness of Elohim has been revealed. A righteousness. It kind of seems like it's non-specific, it seems. I don't think that it is. I don't understand why. Sometimes the Greek is just kind of interesting in that way. But it says a righteousness of Elohim. So when we think about the righteousness of Elohim, what are we talking about? We're talking about a way, right? It's a lifestyle, the righteousness of Elohim. It could be a status, the righteousness of Elohim. The righteousness of Elohim could be described as the character of the Most High. But also the righteousness of Elohim could be described as the way, as it even is in this one sentence here, right? A righteousness of Elohim has been revealed, being witnessed by the Torah and the prophets, and the righteousness of Elohim is through faith. And so it could be a way, kind of generally speaking, a lifestyle, a status, description of the character of the Most High, but it's also the way. I think the way of, the righteousness of Elohim is specifically speaking of Yeshua. And the Spirit in us. And so it's interesting when we look at these verses here where it talks about apart from the law, which is that thing which shows us what the righteousness of Elohim is. Apart from that, a righteousness of Elohim has been revealed. So it's something more than just the actual words written down. That thing, that righteousness of Elohim, was bear witness by the words that were written down and also the prophets. But there's something that's separate, set apart from the law and the prophets, but was witnessed by them. And in verse 22, the righteousness of Elohim is through faith in Yeshua. And so when we think about the righteousness of Elohim, it seems as if this is pointing towards, it's hinting towards the Spirit in us. It's apart from the law that's written down, but it's witnessed by the law that's written down. And then through faith in Yeshua, this righteousness of Elohim is revealed to those who believe in Messiah. All, in fact, it said, who believe. All who believe. There's no difference. There's no distinction. There's nobody who's not able to believe and have these things be revealed to them. 23 says it's necessary for everybody to get to that place of belief because everybody falls short. And everybody has sinned. Everybody needs this righteousness of Elohim.
It says there's no distinction.
No distinction. There's no distinction. There's no differentiation. Everybody needs it. Anybody who believes receives it. But 23 is saying everybody needs it. Nobody makes it without this faith. Okay, so moving on, 24, it said you read 24, it said being declared right, which is interesting, without pain. Being declared right, being justified. I think the King James might say justified. That's the thought there, being declared right. Because in justification, it's kind of self-explanatory, being declared right without pain. It's not merit-based. You've been declared right not because you've done anything, not because you paid anything. We talked about in the Torah, the Most High don't deal with bribery anyway. So you couldn't bribe yourself into righteousness. But he said being declared right, or, from this word that's used here, it has a kind of a legal connotation where a judge will weigh the evidence and decide whether or not, what the verdict is. And based on his determination, does he declare one to be right or not? Right? So when you look at this being declared right without paying, this is what it is that Messiah has provided for us. Through redemption. That's how he did it. And so again, when we think about atonement, because again, atonement is this thing that we realize it, but we don't do anything for it necessarily. The priest is doing it. But when we think about these steps here are also about things that are being done that we're not working for these things. Redemption, justification. But then it goes on in 25, whom Elohim set forth as an atonement. As an atonement. And so, we think about the Yeshua as the the Lamb of Elohim. We think about the blood that he shed and it being that thing that redeems us, that pays the debt for us. But it's interesting that the thing that Yeshua did at Passover, from a spiritual standpoint, he's also making an atonement for us at the same time. That same sacrifice is used later for our atonement, right? And so atonement is about, I think the King James might say, propitiation. Propitiation, which is an appeasing of wrath. It's an appeasing of wrath. Because of sin, the wages of sin is death. Because of sin, you're owed death. There's a penalty that is connected to that sin. And so there is a penalty that you owe. There's wrath that is, in fact, coming your way. There's a debt that is owed, and atonement is the placating of that debt. That debt is satisfied.
I think in verse 24, that's what was supposed to be paid.
Right. That's the thing that's paid, that you're not able to pay.
Right. No.
You can't pay. You don't have the funds, insufficient funds to do it. Right? And so he's the one that does it. And the thing that's relevant to what we're talking about, apart from the fact that we're talking about atonement, but read the last part of 25 one more time.
Whom Elohim set forth as an atonement through belief in his blood to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his tolerance Elohim had passed over the sins that had taken place before.
That had taken place before. And so when we, by faith, go to Messiah and ask for his forgiveness, and apply that blood that he shed to our situation, he deals with everything from that point backwards. You got a clean slate. But it literally says that had taken place before, though. Right? He not dying again. But you gonna have to repent again. You have access to that forgiveness. You got access to that blood. But you got to apply that blood to your situation now. Because that thing that he did is from the time that you receive it, retro. Backwards. It's not forwards. He did something for us, and it erases all the ill that we've done. But we might mess around and do something the next day. It might not put us all the way back at square one, but we got some things. A little bit of blemishes on the situation. Right, that we have to give over to the Most High through His Son Yeshua. So atonement, the Day of Atonement deals with this as an idea, is that we have to always look at ourselves. We always have to do an inspection of our life and the things that we're doing. We always have to be able to look at the ways in which we walk out this life. To the closer we get to the Most High, the more like Yeshua we become, the more we are able to understand the faults in our own selves, the better that we're able to remove those said faults. If he's light and sin and things that are contrary to him are darkness, and we become light, the more that we become light, the more that we're able to see darkness and things that don't belong, so that we're able to have those things be removed. It only makes sense, right? Okay, let's look at some other things. Let's look at some other verses over here. Let's go to the book of Hebrews. Because Hebrews talks to us also about things that we can think about in terms of the Day of Atonement and its significance. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9. And just begin reading at the first verse there.
Hebrews chapter 9. Now the first covenant indeed had regulations of worship and the earthly set-apart place. For a tent was prepared for the first part, in which was the lampstand, and the table, and the showbread, which is called the set-apart place. And after the second veil, the part of the tent which is called the most separate part, the most set apart, to which belonged the golden censer, and the ark of the covenant overlaid on all sides with gold, in which were the golden pot that held the manna, and the rod of Abraham, the rod of Aaron that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. and above it, sorry, I don't have my glasses. What's that word? Cherubim of the esteem were overshadowing the place of atonement, about which we do not now speak in detail. And these having been prepared like this, the priest always went into the first part of the tent, accomplishing the services. But into the second part of the high priest went alone once a year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins of ignorance of the people.
Okay, hold on, stop right there. So when this happened, this part right here, but in the second part, the place beyond the veil, the second part, you go into the first part, that's just the holy place, and in the second part, the most holy place beyond the veil, once a year, the priest went in, not without blood. That's the Day of Atonement. That's the Day of Atonement, right? And so what had happened, what happened at that time was the priest did a total cleansing of himself, of the people, of all of the things, the altar, all of the things were cleansed. And all sin, as I mentioned before, all sin, all transgression, all iniquity that had happened already is dealt with and cleansed by the people. By the priest for the people at that time.
For that year.
For that year. And so it's interesting when you think about that, because that process had to be done every year. Because people fell short every day. And so they had to go and get this bull, kill it. And these goats, kill one of them, let one go. They had to go and do all these things, these different sacrifices for that sin. And so when we think about what it is that Yeshua has done, well, let's keep on reading because it talks about it. Read verse 8 right there. Well, just begin to read at verse 8.
The set apart spirit signifying this, that the way into the most set apart place was not yet made manifest, while the first tent has a standing, which was a parable for the present time, in which both gifts and slaughters are offered, which are unable to perfect the one serving as to his conscience. Okay, so the things that they did, although they were received by the Most High for atonement, for the forgiveness of sins, it didn't do anything to the person's conscience when they did it. It didn't change the person in any way from a spiritual standpoint. From kind of a religious, ceremonial standpoint, he was declared right by those actions that he did. But his conscience, his inner self remained the same. It wasn't seared with that hot iron.
It wasn't even penetrated.
Right.
Because it was all carnal. With spiritual undertones. It pointed us towards something more, but it wasn't it. But it's the same thing we think about when we think about what was talking about in Romans, where it talked about the righteousness of Elohim that was apart from the Torah. The Torah only pointed us towards that revelation, but it wasn't itself wasn't the revelation. Verse 10.
Only as to foods and drinks, the different washings and fleshly regulations imposed until a time of setting matters straight.
Until a time of setting matters straight. The thing that that Yeshua came to do actually was to set these matters straight. Where we're doing these things, we did these things, these, as it says here, different washings, fleshly regulations, were things to point us in a particular direction for us to have an understanding. They were object lessons for what it is that Messiah was going to come and do. But these things didn't do anything with our inner self. I mean, it's evident. We look at the people, they had all of the things spelled out to them perfectly. They didn't have to go and study nothing. Everything was right there, straight from the source. Do this, and this. But they didn't do it.
I mean, you literally look up on the mountain and you got the flame,
He's
and
right there.
You were still cutting up.
Like right after that. They literally just heard the Most High speaking. So much so that they was like, please, I don't want to hear that speaking no more. You talk to us instead. They was so fearful that they didn't want to hear his voice no more, but they wasn't fearful enough not to make that golden calf.
It's crazy.
But they had the things. But those things did not do anything with their inner self. But then verse 11 say what?
But Messiah, having become a high priest of the coming good matters through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation.
And 12.
Entered into the set apart place. It's entered into the set apart places once and for all, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood, having obtained everlasting redemption.
Okay, very good. So when we look at the original Day of Atonement, the sacrifice is the thing that needed to be done every year. What the priest did had to be done every year. But it was only pointing us towards the thing that Messiah did one time, once and for all, not with blood and goats and calves, but with his own blood. And it says, having obtained everlasting redemption. And so when we think about the Day of Atonement and the thing and the way that Yeshua fulfills the Day of Atonement, he fulfills that priestly portion of it in terms of the sacrificial part of it, the officiating of it, the cleansing part of it. But the people still got to come. The people still have to confess their sins to the priests. That part is still there. The thing that Yeshua came to do is become, it said in verse 11, he became a high priest. That's the part that he fixes there. Because the thing that he adds to this situation is something that does in fact change one's conscience. The thing that the fleshly things couldn't do, this high priest came. He said, having become a high priest of the coming good matters. He was able to do something that the law externally could never do. Something that the blood of bulls and goats could never do. Oh, read 13 and 14.
For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the defiled, sets apart for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Messiah, who through the everlasting Spirit offered himself, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living Elohim.
Okay, so not to say that these things didn't have their place and purpose. Because once these things were done, you had a clean slate. But it was carnal, it was external. It was able to sanctify the flesh. It was good for that. But we need to be cleansed internally. We need the Spirit of the Most High to dwell on the inside of us and transform us on the inside out. We need for our hearts to be changed and transformed. There's only so much that the external laws and commands can do. At some point, those things need to be internalized. And that's the thing that Messiah, Yeshua, has came to do for each and every one of us, is to cause his Spirit to be on the inside of us. Okay, let's keep on going down in Hebrews chapter 9. 15.
Verse 15. And because of this, he is the mediator of the renewed covenant, so that death having taken place for redemption of the transgressions under the first covenant, those who are called might receive the promise of the everlasting inheritance. For where a covenant is, it is necessary for the death of the covenanted one to be established. For the covenant over those dead is firm, since it is never valid while the covenanted one is living. Therefore, not even the first covenant was instituted without blood. For when, according to Torah, every command had been spoken by Moshe to all the people, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant which Elohim commanded you." And in the same way, he sprinkled with blood both the tent and all the vessels of the service. And according to the Torah, almost all is cleansed with blood. And without shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. It was necessary then that the copies of the heavenly ones should be cleansed with these, but the heavenly ones themselves with better slaughter offerings than these. For Messiah has not entered into the set-apart place made by hand, figures of the true, but into the heavens itself, now appear in the presence of Elohim on behalf, not that he should offer himself often as the high priest enters into the set-apart place year by year with blood not his own, for if so, he would have had to suffer often since the foundation of the world, but now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sins by offering of himself. And as it awaits men to die once, and after this the judgment, so also the Messiah, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, shall appear a second time apart from sin to those waiting for him unto deliverance.
Okay, very good. So it talks about there, interesting, where it helps us to see that the thing that the priest did is the exact same thing that Messiah has done in the spirit. The priest literally had to take that blood and go into the most holy place, the place where the presence of the Most High was. The high priest had to go in there with the blood. And when he did that, it was the culmination of all of the things that he was doing. That's how he made the atonement for himself and the people. But it said in 24, that Yeshua, that Messiah, has not entered into a holy place made by hands. That thing was a figure of the truth, but that's not where he went. But into heaven itself, to appear into the actual presence of Elohim on our behalf. And so the thing that he did was the thing that the priests did. But the people still had to come and confess their sins and ask for forgiveness. And that those sins be laid onto that goat that went off into the wilderness. But it says here that because of what it is that Messiah has done, we don't have to go through these things annually, because they didn't do anything for our spirit anyway. But we still have to deal with the fact that sin exists in this place where we are right now. We, unfortunately, none of us walk around here perfect. Might be close. But close to perfect ain't perfect. It don't matter how close you is. Because you still not perfect. There's still a thing that you did that you didn't have no business doing. And some of those things, you may not even have no idea that you did it. And so when we think about the Day of Atonement, that's what this Day of Atonement is about. It's about, first of all, acknowledging the fact that Yeshua is, in fact, the one who's able to cleanse us. And he's also the one that is able to forgive us of the things that we do that's contrary to the will of the Most High. But also we have to think about the fact that although we may live in this life and strive to live a life that's according to the Most High, we still fall short. And so we need this time where we're not concentrating on our physical, our carnal appetites, but focusing on the Most High and His righteousness and living a life that's continually growing, and we're continually trying to emulate through the spirit inside of us emulates the character of the Most High, and manifest the image of Messiah inside of us. And so, this Day of Atonement, we think about the Most High and His righteousness and His holiness. And we think about whatever level of holiness that exists inside of us. And wherever you're at, there's always room for more. We're always able to look at our own selves and find, as we shine the light, no matter how much we clean, we're still able to find a speck of something somewhere. And that's what this time is about. It's about looking into yourself, looking at the Most High, looking into yourself through the lens of the Most High, through the lens of the Ruach HaKodesh, and allowing the Most High to reveal things to you which cause you to change.